Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You're joining the Colorado Restaurant and Bar Show virtual education series. Today, you're joining the Navigating Unemployment Insurance Fraud for Restaurant Operators session. As you guys know, it's been an extremely stressful 13 months for restaurant owners since the onset of the pandemic in March of 2020. Since that time, we've all had to channel our deepest recesses of creativity and resilience to adapt our businesses to survive. Along the way, there have been a myriad of new challenges to navigate. Today's webinar will address one such pandemic-era challenge: the staggering number of fraudulent unemployment claims that have been filed over the past year. Today, we will discuss unemployment insurance fraud and how to navigate it as a restaurant operator. We will offer background on the current fraud landscape, discuss what the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment is doing to address it, explain best practices for reporting fraud, and cover what restaurant operators need to know and do to protect their businesses and employees. We'll be featuring leadership from the CDLE, Daniel Chase, Phil Spessart, and Cher Havand, who will share insights and best practices. We'll also hear from Kristen White, partner at Fisher & Phillips, with guidance on how to protect your business and employees. And also supporting the discussion will be Molly Steineman, Local Government Affairs Manager with the Colorado Restaurant Association. If you have any questions during the discussion, please use the Q&A function in your Zoom window. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Daniel.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Sally Ann, for introducing us today. We are with the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. My name is Daniel Chase, Chief of Staff here at the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. And joining me today, Phil Spessart and Cher Havand. Phil is our UI Division Director and Cher is our Deputy Executive Director and Chief Communications Officer. So we're here to talk to you guys about all things unemployment insurance fraud, what we're doing, and what we need help from you guys as employers. This isn't just our fight. Unfortunately, if it were, I think we would lose. At this point, it's a challenging fight that we have, and we need your help to get this worked through. So we're just going to go over some overview first on kind of the numbers, what we're seeing at the Department of Labor around UI fraud. Then we'll dig into what we're doing about UI fraud and how we are approaching UI fraud. And then we'll get into what we recommend for victims and what we recommend for employers. So with that, I'm going to start off with Cher Havand, who's going to walk us through kind of the overview of UI fraud today and what's happening.
Great, thanks, Daniel. So, you know, it's no secret that the global pandemic has had a dramatic impact on UI programs across the country. And it didn't just stop with a historical increase in UI claims like we had never seen before. It actually continued even when claims started leveling off, which it's a little bit of a misnomer at this point, but we always knew fraud would be an issue. It was an issue during the Great Recession. It was just a different type of fraud than we've ever seen before during the pandemic, and I'll explain why. So, you know, the department and all UI programs have traditionally relied on the sanctity of a PII and social security numbers and other identifying information to validate unemployment insurance claims. Over the last few years, some fairly significant data breaches have made PII available through a variety of channels, specifically the dark web, where criminals can purchase for a few dollars an individual's identity, and then commit all sorts of fraudulent crimes, including UI fraud, tax fraud, and other issues. As an example, recently we had a scheme that was identified in another state. And it was 3 criminals, and when they were pulled over by local police, it was discovered that they actually had 3,500 individuals PII that they were in possession of and had filed fraudulent claims for all of those 3,500 people. And that is just a drop in the bucket. That's just one small example of what we've seen nationally with regard to fraud. Last year, when Congress passed the CARES Act, extending unemployment insurance to gig workers, self-employed, and independent contractors. Unfortunately, just by the nature of that program, it made UI programs even more susceptible to fraud because of the lack of identification verification and wage verification measures that are found in the regular UI system that were not found in the gig worker independent contractor system. And so we began to see a fairly significant trend of an increase in fraudulent claims, suspected fraudulent claims last year. And so we implemented a number of fraud identifiers and triggers in our new system that we actually were able to stand up to administer these benefits as part of an ongoing modernization effort. But as soon as we were able to identify the fraud and implement a number of triggers with that program known as Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, no sooner did the federal programs expire at the end of last year, and the criminals started turning their attention to regular UI systems, taking stolen identity, filing fraudulent UI claims for regular benefits. And of course, this has been seen by virtually every industry in the state and nationally, where regular UI programs were now affecting, and fraud in regular UI was affecting employers. Daniel, I'll go ahead and take this one just real quick. So as I said, what we have experienced during the pandemic is nothing like we had ever seen before. As an example, in 2019, we had 88 cases of fraud. In 2020, we had over 1 million. It's almost unimaginable what the criminals have done to attack systems nationally. Another crime ring that was identified had stolen $36 billion in unemployment using stolen identities. And the US DOL reports that it will likely surpass hundreds, if maybe even 200-300 billion, but certainly we're probably well over 100 billion in fraud right now. So our strategy is not just about preventing a fraudulent claim, but stopping the payment. And this is where you will come in, and my colleagues will speak to this shortly. We reported recently that we did in fact confirm 19 million in fraudulent payments, but we've prevented well over 400 million, and that's a very low estimate. So really, again, the key is stopping these fraudulent claims as soon as they're identified either by you or individuals, reporting those to us so the criminals are not able to access those funds. My colleague Phil will get into what you can do if you suspect somebody is reported or filed a fraudulent claim against you as an employer. We really want to stress throughout this presentation that while you will still likely receive communication from the department, please know that we're taking every step necessary to shut that claim down. And so any communication you can certainly disregard, and we'll let Phil get into that shortly. And here's where we need your help. Daniel?
Yeah, so thank you, Sharon. I just want to get a little more in depth about what we're doing on our side to prevent fraudulent unemployment payments from going out the door. So as Sharon said, our strategy at this point is to prevent payment on fraudulent claims. We cannot at this time prevent a fraudulent claim from being filed in our system. We have no information of which to compare that against when they're filing. And so we can't verify that until that claim gets filed as to whether or not that claim is suspected of fraud. So at this point, what our system does and what we've implemented is we started back in June when we started to get hit hard. We started with 8 indicators of a fraudulent claim. And so this could range anywhere from the Social Security number comes up as deceased to maybe multiple claims being filed from a single address or other things that we've seen, other patterns that we've seen across fraudulent claims and other things. So we had 8 at that time. Of course, as we get smarter, so do the criminals. Today, we now have 58 indicators of a fraudulent claim. And so what our system does, and as of January, we fully modernized our unemployment insurance system, which included the state UI side, which was not at last year, the state UI side was not modernized and did not give us the tools necessary to prevent this kind of fraudulent activity in our system. Today, with our modernized system, we run all 58 indicators against every single claim in our system every single night. And so what that means is that if any single indicator is triggered on a claim, no matter when that is, whether they do it when they file or they do it 3 days later, they do it 4 weeks later, that automatically will then trigger a payment hold on that claim until further investigation takes place. The other piece that we like about our new modernized system is that we can also begin to automate the holds being placed on claims that are reported as fraudulent to us through our various online forms, either by the victim or by the employer. And Phil will get a little more into that side of things. But just to keep in mind that the reason you as employers are seeing all of this paperwork and seeing the debit cards go out to victims, and it looks very much like we are letting all these claims go through, we are paying all these claims. But the reason is just because of the timing. Once a claim gets filed in our system, the system automatically will send fact finding out to employers, all employers that are listed on the SSN. So it's not something the criminal can choose. It will automatically trigger if you have reported wages on an SSN, that will automatically trigger a fact finding to you as the employer. The other thing that we're seeing for employers is we're seeing that multiple claims are being filed against them from people that have never before worked at that employer. So these are all people that are just getting filed against it, and you have no idea who they are. And so just keep in mind that because the criminal is putting you as the employer in there, and so fact finding is triggering that way, that does not allow the claimant or the criminal to get funds charged to you because you haven't reported any wages on those claims. So that's not as big of a risk to you as an employer as a claim that is using identity theft of one of your employees. So with that, I'm going to get a little bit into what we what is fraud for employers, and then what employers need. And I'm going to actually turn this over to Phil to take on these employer slides, and then we're going to dive a little bit into what guidance we have for victims before we start opening up for questions. So Phil, you want to take the employer piece?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. And first, what we want to do is let you know what really is fraud related to questionnaires. So a quick reminder here that when an individual files an unemployment insurance claim, we're not necessarily looking at just the immediate time before that claim to determine the value of it. Remember that the claim is based on something known as a base period, which is the first 4 of the last 5 completed quarters. So individuals are actually filing a quarter 6 related to that as you're working backwards. So some of you will receive forms and wonder, why am I receiving this form for somebody who hasn't worked for me for 12 months? It may very well be that that is a valid unemployment insurance claim that they have filed, and that they had enough earnings from you within the base period to generate that questionnaire. However, indicators of fraud here is we want you to report a claim as fraudulent if you receive questionnaires for any employee that's still working for you and hasn't suffered any loss of hours. We encourage you to have a conversation with that individual first to ask and ensure that they had not filed the unemployment insurance claim. Reason for that is, as Cher and as Daniel have both indicated, there were several breaches over some large platforms in preceding years, and many individuals don't always know that they've been the victim of those type of breaches until these unemployment insurance claims have been filed for them. So if you have somebody still working for you full-time, first and foremost, please talk to them about that before automatically reporting it as fraudulent. Then, if they indicate they did not report that they have not filed that claim, we're going to have you direct them online to our coloradoui.gov so that they can fill out a form there online for individuals reporting fraud. We're also going to ask that you go there to immediately report that fraud. Reason for that is going to be because that allows us to use that automated process to shut down those claims or prevent them from paying. Again, a quick reminder, when you do that, you will receive a notification that we've received your fraud report, and it will also tell you you may still find paperwork or still receive paperwork associated with the claim. What we are doing is preventing payment. So also, as Daniel had touched on, if you receive a claim for someone who has never worked for you, that's a good indicator that that is fraud there. On the upside on these, that also means you didn't report any wages, so there likely wouldn't be any charges against your account if you delayed in this, but we don't want you to delay here. Reason for that is we want to stop payments on all these claims. As we've also discussed, we currently have 58 fraud holds that we apply to claims every night. This is how we learn new techniques that the fraudsters are using and continue to add to that number of fraud holds. And so if you also receive information with a non-matching name and social security number info, or an employee who separated in the past and confirms they did not file the claim, you want to work on reporting those to us. Report those rather than on the questionnaires that come to you. Again, report those online at coloradoui.gov. And so I guess we'll move into, Daniel, next. What is not fraud? So we kind of touched on that quickly. Again, it's not fraud if you receive a claim for an employee that worked for you, but you disagree with the fact that they deserve benefits. In other words, they quit, they were discharged. That's not a fraudulent claim. Those are the ones you want to complete the questionnaire and get those questionnaires in quickly. I will note some of you may receive those questionnaires and look at them and say, it doesn't look like I have enough time to respond. Respond on those anyways. We have removed the loss of right to protest at this point in time for a couple of reasons. There is a known issue within the system that is being worked on that is shorting the period of time you have to respond. By law, it is now 7 calendar days. Respond as soon as you have that. Again, if it's somebody who quit or was discharged. Again, we discussed this earlier. The claimant does not choose the employers to send the fact finding to. The system generates those based on anybody they've worked with in the past 18 months and earned more than $1,000. So again, please provide with filling out those forms. If you receive a decision you disagree with, then you go through an appeal process on those. Submitting fraud reports on our website holds payment on the claim while it's pending investigation. But again, I can't reiterate enough, you may continue to receive paperwork that's automatically generated for that claim. That does not mean we are paying unemployment insurance benefits on the claim. Those are just processes that are automated. There are some automated processes that were causing employers great angst, and with good reason. One of them was that loss of right to protest, which was actually an automatically generated decision. We have turned that off for the time being so that you do not receive those type of decisions at this point in time. And so what should an employer do quickly is immediately report the suspected fraud to CDLE to us via our online form. Again, that's at coloradoui.gov. I can't reiterate that enough. That's what helps us stop those payments up front. That's what helps us continue to adjust our fraud holds. You are able to, once you have provided that documentation on a fraudulent claim, you can disregard the additional correspondence that we are going to send you on those claims as they're automatically generated again. And please do inform the employee that they may have been the victim of identity theft. And then again, direct them to our website so they can look for additional resources on steps they need to take to continue to protect themselves related to freezing credit reports and onward. So employers should not complete the questionnaire for a fraudulent unemployment claim that you receive. Submitting that report online holds payment pending investigations. If you are filling out the questionnaire, please remember that we are currently still operating under the executive order that encourages payment while we are processing unemployment insurance claims. So you can put the word fraud all you want on those questionnaires. There is a significant backlog and work that needs to be completed to give you a rough idea of the type of work that we are looking at or backlog. In the first 6 weeks of the pandemic, we received a total amount of claims just in the state side that's equivalent to well over 3 years worth of work. So it takes an extended period of time to be able to actually look at those forms and review them. So again, go online, report it as fraud. Don't complete the questionnaire. If you are a sides employer, you still have to respond on that system. However, we are working on a process with electronic bots to be able to go in and pick up the word fraud within those so that we can look to shut down those claims through more automated processes. Do not file an appeal on a fraudulent claim. Payment of any fraudulent benefits will not be charged to your account upon a finding of fraud. So we need to investigate all these when they are first reported. And it ultimately will not experience your experience rating when premium rates are calculated. So again, do not call the main number to report. That's the one for claimants. What we want you to do is if you need to speak to somebody, we want to direct you to call our employer services phone number. That's at 303-318-9100 if you have any questions. but we want you to call that if you have questions after completing the form fraud primarily. Although we do understand some of you may not be able to find the fraud form or may not have the capacity or capability to fill out that form. So certainly if you can't fill out that form, make sure you call that number. And at this point, I'm going to hand this back over to Daniel related to what victims should do.
Thanks, Phil. And so we just always want to reiterate what victims of unemployment insurance fraud should do. Keep in mind the unemployment insurance fraud is not, it's only a symptom of the root issue for these folks, and that's that their identities have been compromised. Through data breaches over the years, their identities have been stolen and put on the dark web for criminals to then use for their own purposes. So unemployment insurance fraud is usually going to be the reason people find out that their identities have been compromised, but it doesn't stop with us. Keep in mind that with identity theft, the next step for these criminals is going to be to do other harmful things to your credit, opening up a line of credit or doing things like that that will have significant impacts on you. And so we will want to make sure that everyone has the resources necessary to fight the identity theft that has taken place. So the first thing they should do is put the fraud alerts on their credit with the 3 credit bureaus. Of course, we want them, as Phil has reiterated many times, we want someone to report this to us through our online forms, coloradoui.gov, and under the tab Fraud Prevention. We need someone to report that to us so that just in case our system does not catch it, we can put a payment hold and make sure that no unemployment benefits are paid out in their name. And then once that gets set, then they're good on our side. But again, they need to take other steps. So online on our website, coloradoui.gov, under fraud prevention, we have partnered with the Attorney General's Office of Consumer Protection to make sure that all of their resources are as up to date as possible. So we have a new identity theft handbook for people who are victims of identity theft, which will go into all the steps they can take to protect themselves. The other thing, and I want to call on Cher for this one, the other thing that we're doing to support victims is we're going to be sending out letters to both employers and victims soon, formal letters from the department that will lay out what happened. So we will say, we know there was a fraudulent claim filed in your name. We've received your fraud report and that claim has been shut down, so that you can use those letters to fight anything else that might happen. So if something gets opened in your credit and you need to contest that, you can have a formal letter from us to say that we know that a fraudulent claim was filed, we know that identity theft took place, and you can use that. Cher, do you want to add anything else to the letter piece?
Thanks, Daniel. I think you covered it adequately, just to really emphasize, since there is understandably so some confusion from the employer community on how this may or may not impact their benefit charges. The letter also serves as a document to provide you as employers cover on those fraudulent claims. And on the individual side, we've seen a lot of requests from individuals who are victims of fraud and want something official from the agency to share with creditors and others if anything comes into question. So we are starting with employers with that letter, and those will start going out. They may have already started going out this week, but very soon.
And that portion of our response really underscores the importance of making sure to report this fraud to us. For victims, we don't necessarily have any contact information for victims just off the bat. All the contact information that we have for victims is what the criminals enter onto that claim that is filed. And often that is not usable phone numbers or emails or anything like that. Usually they have been using victim's address, which helps us. So we will be mailing it through that as well. And we do mail a notice of an initial claim to the address automatically, so that hopefully that helps victims catch this before it does any damage. So we're trying to enhance our communication out to both employers and victims to make sure that they are supported as they fight this identity theft. So that's kind of our purpose there. And with that, do we want to move to questions, or do we want to move to Kristen? And then questions. It's up to you guys. Hearing none, I think Kristen, you want to start, and then we'll go into questions overall.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, because I just have a few things to add. I appreciate being a part of the discussion today. Being in the employment law world, unemployment wasn't something we really dealt with before the pandemic. So, it's been one of those learning pieces for everyone. So Daniel, we can go to the next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to recommend, Daniel talked a lot about, and most of the time they're getting this fraudulent information from the dark web and from other breaches that have happened. But one of the things we want to emphasize, when you're looking to protect your business, is just to make sure that your network security is secure. From an employer side, and make sure that the leak, isn't coming from you. So, it's a good time now to make, take those checks, make sure that your network security is in place. You've got the updating of passwords. I mean, these are really kind of the basics on network security and data privacy. But, I'd like to emphasize that just a little bit when you're thinking about how can I protect my business. As has been mentioned here today, there's not going to be a silver bullet way to do that. But just from the employment law side, just making sure that, in fact, the leak's not coming from you, and that you've got your secure systems in place with your firewalls, your antivirus software, and that you're educating your employees about it, letting the employees know that here's the protections we have in place. Here's why we make you change your passwords every 6 months or 3 months, whatever it may be. And here's why we don't want you going to, random sites on your work computers, because we don't want to be part of, where these breaches happen. And then that also lets your employees know the things that you're doing to try to make sure that you're not contributing to this, because, we've had, a lot of clients that have had this fraud happen, and it's very nerve-wracking for both the employer and the employee to realize that someone's got a hold of their identity. So the more you can educate them to at least show, look, we're doing our part to try to make sure it doesn't happen, it helps with the employee morale and with that communication piece. So we go to the next one, Daniel. So one of the things I just want to emphasize, really kind of piggybacking on what you've heard, when you get the unemployment claims and the paperwork from their office, please make sure that you are reading those and responding appropriately. That's really the first one here. And as Phil mentioned, what is not a fraudulent claim, you have the right to respond to those claims, but you need to do it timely. So make sure that you are reviewing the mail that's coming in on a timely basis and that you're responding, because you just want to make sure that, if this is something that you want to respond to in whichever manner it may be, that you're going to challenge the unemployment, you're going to be okay with it. But you just want to make sure that you're doing that in a timely basis. And that also allows you to quickly determine if you have a fraudulent claim. Because that's one of the things, if it sits on the desk for a week or two, the harder it is. As Phil mentioned, the best place to stop this is that you report it as fraud as soon as you notice it. So just make sure that you're reviewing when you get this mail, you're responding appropriately and timely, and that you're looking back at those charge benefit statements. Just really keeping track of it will help you and help the agency try to fight back and push back when there are fraudulent claims. Let me go to the next one. Thank you. So after it occurs, I just wanted to reiterate here, from an employer standpoint, there is an obligation to investigate. So talk to the employee, find out, if they filed a claim, if they didn't, anything that they may know, because the employee may be aware that their identity was stolen potentially through other means, the credit card fraud or something like that. So, talk to the employee, find out what they know first, and make that immediate report on the website. And then encourage your employees to take action, and this is really part of that education piece, that most employees, if they've never been a victim of identity theft, they may not know how to get started. So sharing the resources that, we've gotten here today can be really helpful in helping them take action and making sure that they feel supported. They know where to turn. They know that you've done your part, you've reported it, but help them know where to go and make the reports, because I think that's really important, that they understand of how they can put those, the freeze on their credit checks and the different things that we've talked about earlier today. But it's still going to be important to do that check of your own system. So while I've recommended we do that ahead of time, want to make sure that if you have, a fraudulent claim come in, especially an employee who is currently working for you. It's different if obviously someone who's never worked for you, you get a report. But if you get a fraudulent claim for an employee that still works for you, you've got an obligation to do a check of your own system, making sure that it didn't come from you. And that follows into the data privacy issues and that, having that breach response team in place of how you handle breaches, and making sure that that didn't happen. Because if you do, you may have reporting obligations that follow from that. So want to make sure that, we get those covered. So, from the employment law angle, this would, really be what I'd highlight for you. If it does happen is, you've got an obligation to investigate, talk to the employee, report it yourself, help your employee report, and then make sure your system is secure. Make sure you're taking those steps. And that's everything I had. It was, pretty short on my end today, because I just want to reiterate what you've heard this earlier. It's just been really important. The do's and the don'ts here are really important. But yeah, from the employer side, you make that report and support your employees is likely, the best we can do to try to push back against these fraudulent claims. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. And so Molly and Sally Ann, we'll turn it over to you guys to moderate the questions piece.
Awesome.
That
So
sounds great.
Kicked off here, and thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to speak with us today. I have a couple sort of lengthy questions here with a couple different pieces of questions here. So for our panelists, I'm just going to toss it out to the group, and if you know the answers, please go ahead and respond. But I'm going to go ahead and read this first one here. And this individual says, my companies has received a number of fraudulent claims. I monitor the claims daily, so identify with these early. I immediately get with the employee named and ask if they have filed. The answer is always no. At that time, I advise them to file a fraud report, and I file one as well. It's done within 24 to 48 hours of receiving the notice of the claim, and pretty much immediately. And yet employees still receive debit cards, meaning the claim continues through the system, even though it's reported as fraud by the supposed claimant and by the employer. Why is that happening?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So if you remember earlier, there are still processes that go on when a claim is filed. The receipt of a debit card has nothing to do with whether an individual is eligible for benefits or receiving unemployment insurance benefits. When a claim is initially filed, it creates several files, and one of those files goes to U.S. Bank to create those debit cards. And so debit cards are automatically sent with the filing of an unemployment insurance claim. The fraudsters aren't working that way anyway. They are filing the claim where it has the debit card, and they are going in and trying to immediately change to a different debit card or to a direct deposit account. But receipt of the debit card does not mean that the claim is going on, that the claim has been authorized for payment, or that it will receive any payment. It's just another one of those automated processes that we spoke about early on.
Awesome, thank you so much. And for our panelists, I'm going to transition to the next sort of long question here, but summarize this a little bit. This person sort of is asking a little bit of a different question that says, what can we do about fraud by former employees who continue to claim benefits when they shouldn't be eligible? I made no furloughs and I have unemployment claims on my account. I can't get a return call from the department at all. So I'll stop there and see if someone wants to take that first question, then I'll try to boil down what other parts this individual is asking.
Yeah, we can go into that part again. Recall from the presentation, that's not fraud. That's an individual who may have quit or who was discharged. The claim requires being processed to determine their entitlement to benefits. Again, remember we discussed that executive order that's been out there. It's been in place since March of 2020, continues to be extended at this point in time. I understand it's difficult to hear that because it means you may be showing some charges against your account at this point in time. However, as we get to and we process those claims, charges will be readjusted. So if they quit for disqualifying reasons or they were discharged for disqualifying reasons, once that's fully processed, those charges would be removed from the account and there would be a credit back on anybody's charging statement related to that. Understand again, when we talked about the volume of work, again, I like to just use those first 6 weeks, but really over the past 54 weeks, total claim volume is over, just in the state side, 770% higher than normal. So immediately on the pandemic, there was an immediate backlog of over 3 years worth of work. And I think by the end of the year, over 5 years worth of work. And so there were some decisions made to where that executive order was issued to allow payments to go out while processing. That's an economic decision. The economics of that decision allowed individuals to receive payments, avoid evictions, and to, at points in time, still have enough disposable income to actually go out and visit facilities that might have been operating on a shoestring budget during this period of time in the pandemic and continue to spend funds in those places of business, hopefully keeping some of our other businesses afloat in the meantime. But again, those adjustments will occur as that processing goes on, but the processing, unfortunately, is a long and laborious, time-consuming piece at this point in time.
And Phil, this might be a good place too to mention process around job refusals for employees that you guys are asking to come back and may refuse that work. So Phil, do you want to just address that real quick?
Yeah, we did. And I know that Kristen had a separate question within this chat, so I had sent her directly the actual site to report job refusals. But the best place to report job refusals is, again, it's a little harder to find. If I tell you go to coloradoui.gov, but then you click under the employer tab, and there's another tab within there for you to automatically report those job refusals at this point in time. Throughout the course of the pandemic, employers have been utilizing that to quickly report job refusals. And there've been, again, in a normal year, there just aren't that many job refusals to report in the process. But the last time I had looked at that form with responses, there had been somewhere closer to well over 4,000 reported job refusals on that form alone. That is the most effective and most efficient way to report those refusals. We have a team of individuals who are working and processing those as quickly as they can so we can stay timely on those. Those create issues that stop payment on unemployment insurance claims. Note that the legislature during the special session did add a couple of other sections that do allow individuals to refuse work and still receive benefits, but those are ones we still process. And as Cher had noted earlier, if what we find is that they really didn't return to work because they're getting paid more on unemployment, that's not a valid reason for refusing work. That also ultimately results in some other problems for some of these claimants related to that payment of FPUC. And nobody knows what that means, but it was the extra $600 that was paid early in the pandemic. The extra $300 is paid right now. So if an individual is determined or deemed to have refused work for you in order to continue receiving those extra payments, that's actually at the federal level considered fraud, and it cuts them off from receiving those payments any further too. So we generally would have a postponement period for a job refusal, but even if they served that postponement period and came back on the claim, they would not be able to collect the additional $300 at this point in time.
And I think Cher wants to add in just a bit here too. Sorry, Molly.
Sorry, just to add in to what Phil said, it is a critical time for employers, as you all know, and having your workforce return so that you can become productive is critical. And so we at CDLE not only take job refusals very seriously in terms of how we're adjudicating claims and determining eligibility, but we also want folks to be directed to additional resources to help them return to work. So whether it's your own job openings or job openings in other industries throughout the state, unemployment insurance is just one component of the department's work with regard to Colorado's workforce. Another even sometimes more critical component is reemployment support and assistance. And that's where we can also help you with any hiring needs, training, recruiting, either for your local workforce center or a variety of virtual events. So just wanted to note that as well. Thanks, Daniel.
Okay, Molly, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you for all that, everyone. And to our attendees, we are still accepting questions. So if you have anything else, please go ahead and enter that into our Q&A function in the chat window. We're getting a couple different questions here about where the appropriate place to report this fraud would be. And Daniel, you mentioned that you should report the claim request into the sides on the UI site. Is that the correct place that people should be filing these claims?
I would never say the word sides. Phil, however, would talk about sides. So Phil, do you want to take this one?
I'm more than willing to blame Daniel for that one. So UI sides or sides is just actually a electronic response for questionnaires that some employers utilize. Some also actually use My UI Employer to provide information to us. So if you don't know what sides is, that generally means you're not using sides. There is one on here that says, but I'm told not to fill that out. Certain third-party administrators who utilize sides, they are required to answer always on sides, so even when it is a fraudulent claim. So if you are using a third-party vendor to complete unemployment information for you, they may still need to report items on sides. You as an employer, if you're reporting a fraud claim, as far as we are concerned, it is sufficient that you simply go online to coloradoui.gov and complete the form there for employers that you are an employer reporting a fraudulent claim or an identity theft claim. That's what allows us to shut down those claims. Again, the reference to sides was, again, related primarily to employers who might be required to always answer on sides, but that fits primarily for third-party administrators.
Awesome, thank you for that. So the next person says, we have filed several fraud reports as well as disputing many claims from employees who quit. Our premiums went up by a large percentage. How do we know whether the rise in our premiums is caused by these, and what can we do about it?
I will take this one because this is a challenging question to answer because there's two different parts to it. So there's part number one, which is you as an employer receives a charging statement quarterly based on the claims filed against you and how that impacts your experience rating and other things. So on that side of things, fraudulent unemployment claims will not affect that. It may look like it now if we haven't fully disqualified the claim, but as we work through the backlog, we will be quickly disqualifying those claims and those will disappear from your charging. Now, keep in mind, if you did pay us, let's say you paid us and that included these fraudulent claims, we would credit your account once those are confirmed fraudulent. So that side of things, you will not see an increase in your premium rates as a result of those fraudulent claims getting charged against your account. However, and this is the bad news, the Department of Labor and Employment has paid out well over $2 to $3 billion from the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund for legitimate UI claims throughout the pandemic, because the pandemic has seen, as Phil said, 5 years worth of claims filed throughout the pandemic. And so because of that, we have had massive increase in expenditures as related to those legitimate claims. And Cher said our confirmed fraud numbers are around 20 million, 19 million. We are currently, so we started the pandemic with about $1.2 billion in surplus in our trust fund. Today we have borrowed, so we went through that full 1.2 billion and we have hit now a borrowing level of just over $1 billion. And so as a result of that general deficit that we are in, again, due to legitimate claimants getting their unemployment insurance benefits, not as a big proportion of that are fraudulent claims. So as a result of those legitimate claims, all premium rates are going up significantly. And so if you look at the statutory rate schedule that is set in state law, and it is set by how much in deficit the trust fund is. So last year we were at the lowest level of premiums because we were coming out of a good economy. We had a huge surplus in our fund. And then, of course, we tanked pretty fast. And so this year, for calendar year 2021, we have shifted 3 schedules over to the right on that table. And next year, we will shift farthest to the right for 2022 and likely beyond, unless something more substantial is done for the trust fund. So to say no, you will not be impacted by fraudulent claims is not necessarily true, because the pandemic itself has caused an increase in premium rates as a result of that. So I just wanted to flag both of those pieces.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Phil, I do have a couple clarifying questions that came in after your response. So the first one is, can you clarify your earlier response? Should employers not be reporting fraud through My UI, but another site?
They should be reporting fraud on our normal website, which is coloradoui.gov.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification.
And
And then
it may help if Daniel, maybe after the presentation, we send you the more direct links to report job refusals, and then fraud as an employer and fraud as a claimant, because then you can feed to them the actual direct link, and then they're not trying to find it through the website.
And
awesome.
Molly, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again real quick, if you don't mind.
Great, please do.
So just to show everyone where we're at on our website, this is coloradoui.gov, our main homepage for unemployment insurance. As you scroll down, one of our big buttons here is report identity theft and fraud. If you go through that, you're going to see a number of links for identity theft, UI fraud generally. We've got first individuals, and then we do have a whole smattering of information for employers, including videos and other things that we've done specifically employer focused. So this has a lot of information for those that may still come out of this with questions. The other thing, as I'm on this, I also want to flag, we have had victims be receiving 1099-Gs from us in the mail indicating we had paid benefits in their name. Keep in mind that if we sent a 1099-G to a victim, we also sent that to the IRS. So for those individuals, we do want them to go to our website here. You'll see more about 1099-G issues. Through that, you can request a corrected and zeroed out 1099-G that we would mail out then to you to zero out that balance with the IRS. You do not have to wait for us to get that done. It takes time for us to process those. You can go ahead and file your taxes as a victim of unemployment insurance fraud. You can file your taxes and just indicate the actual income you received from us, which for most victims is going to be $0. And that is straight from the IRS guidance. The other piece that Phil mentioned, through our website, coloradoui.gov, you're going to see the employer tab here. Phil, you might have to fill in for me. Oh, there it is right there. Report a job refusal. So that's how you're going to report those to us as you guys are inviting your workforce back to work, should that happen with that. So I just wanted to flag that for everyone.
Thank you for that screen share. That definitely helps, Daniel. And to our attendees, anything that we have from our panelists today, we'll be sharing in a hard print copy via our newsletter. So please keep an eye out for some other information coming soon. This person asks, I had several fraudulent claims early on, a month or so ago, and did not know about reporting online. Even though it's been a while, should I still report?
Yes, you should still report there now that you know about it. Chances are very good that we've already closed down the claim through our fraud holds. But again, the fraudsters are persistent and they are very smart and they make adjustments. They spend a lot of time trying to figure out what our fraud holds are so they can try to get around those. So again, that assists us in multiple ways. It allows us to ensure the claim is shut down. I can tell you on questions that have come in across my desk related to fraud, 9 out of every 10 of those that somebody's reporting to fraud have already had fraud holds on them. So again, there's 10% at least coming across my desk that we're missing. And so those fraud reports help. Even if you didn't know about it until today, go in and fill that out.
This person asks, we've had many people arrange job interviews with us, but then they don't show up. We feel this may be so that they can report that they have applied for a job with the UI and then they don't actually want to get the job to stay on unemployment. Is there anything that can be done about this?
Yeah, that's not quite a job refusal yet. And unfortunately, you're not the only victim of it. We've been victims of it as we've tried to hire individuals to work in the call center. The whole ghosting, so you can fill that out and indicate that I've been seeking work. There will be a point in time where we will audit a certain number of claims throughout the course of a year to confirm and check in on that job search that individuals were making. But unfortunately, at that point in time, it doesn't qualify as a job refusal.
Phil, can I add in something there? So as Phil said, we will do some auditing of these claims, and there are work search requirements. And if determined that they did not complete a valid work search, those benefits could be determined as an overpayment, require repayment. Also, we, again, as Phil said, saw this in the Great Recession. The federal government offered an additional $25 a week on top of a UI benefit amount. This go around started at $600, it's now $300 a week. All of these benefits, the federally funded benefits, are set to expire in September. And so again, in Colorado during the recession, individuals were eligible for up to 99 weeks of benefits. And as soon as those benefits expired, suddenly folks found suitable employment. And it's really a tough situation for our employer community to find themselves in. We hope, doesn't necessarily constitute fraud, as Phil said, or not completing a valid work search. But certainly, if you have these concerns, you can report them into us. We do have an employer email we send out. You can subscribe to that. We can drop that in the chat as well. If nothing else, anecdotally, we like to hear these stories so we can better inform claimants consequences of actions like that.
Yeah, and I would jump back in and to say there's nothing wrong with you reporting that we had set up an interview. Joe Smith had agreed to come to an interview and didn't show up to an interview. What a prime candidate for us to actually audit their work search.
Awesome. And then sort of following one of your earlier comments there, Cher, we have a question here. Will individuals be required to pay back benefits received if they quit or if they were fired?
I think that's a good question for Phil, but I will kind of address this high level. So once we adjudicate a claim that, let's say, we've paid out some amount of money during the pandemic, that will create an overpayment. So essentially we will say you were not eligible for these benefits for either some or all of the time. Now keep in mind that doesn't necessarily mean you weren't eligible for any benefits, because if you're not eligible for state UI, that is a eligibility criteria for pandemic unemployment assistance, the federal benefits. So within our own systems, we would set up the overpayment, and depending on the reason, so obviously fraud, we're going to go after that harder than most. But if it's not necessarily through the fault of the employee or the employer, maybe they were let go from their job in March because of the pandemic, but they had only been working there 3 months. So they didn't have a lot of wages from that employer, but the employer they worked for, for the whole year of 2019, let's say they quit from that job. So they were disqualified from their main employer. And as such, we're set up with a big overpayment. Those ones will likely write off and not go after collections. Keep in mind, if we went after all overpayments as a result of this pandemic, it would likely slow the recovery of the economy. That's how much money we're talking about. So we would have to be, we're going to be pretty judicial about how we go after those benefits, if it's something we will go after. Otherwise, we will write off for many of these claimants. Phil, anything to fill in there?
Yeah, I think a couple other things to consider here is that really, if we go back and we process on the state claim and we're removing benefits because they quit you and you're not the last employer, so really the total payable on their state claim should have been less. So the claim would have exhausted at an earlier point in time than it actually did. That really just means that individual was eligible for those extended benefits at an earlier point in time. So the system also needs to adjust what those effective dates are on when those programs were in play. And so to the extent that there would be any overpayment on a claim like that, that overpayment then moves out to where it's actually we've paid more extended benefits than we should have at a point in time. And so it's not necessarily an overpayment that impacts the trust fund so much as it impacts those federal benefits that were paid. Now, again, we can all discuss on that. That impacts federal taxpayers, but each employer on here is both a federal taxpayer and a state contributing employer to this program. So the employers are double taxed sort of at a certain level if you think about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Following up on one of the earlier responses, this person says, regarding sending you the names of prospective employees who don't show up for an interview, where would we send those names? Is that through the refusal to work form?
We have received various things for the refusal to work form, because I saw another question on here. Sometimes I don't get any response when I fill out that form. And there could be various reasons for that. So it might be one of your current employees and you're trying to call them back and they haven't come back. Those ones should be processed so long as they are still trying to collect unemployment insurance benefits. So some of these individuals are not trying to collect unemployment insurance benefits when they turn down work for you. And we do receive some of those reports. So that will not generate anything because there's not a claim for that to process and attach to. Other ones, I saw a comment in here about being rubber stamped. Nothing is being rubber stamped. We have requirements, federal requirements to provide due process when we are issuing those decisions. And so the more often that you will actually receive a decision on a job refusal is if you are a base period employer on the claim and now you've called somebody back to work and they haven't returned to work for you. If you are not a base period employer on that claim, then what's going to happen is it's the claimant who's going to receive that decision, because it's not going to impact your account at that point in time. So there are various reasons why you may or may not receive information related to the job refusals.
Phil, I will just add, if Tracy can drop in, there is an email address for our employer services unit. And you can drop that in the chat as well. And you could certainly report any suspicious work search activity, lack thereof, I should say, through the employer services email. And if Tracy can drop that in, that would be great.
Correct. In the old days, we would call that tips and leads. It would go over to our overpayment and benefit payment control unit and the integrity unit. And they would follow up on those tips and leads to start investigating an individual's work search activity.
Great, thank you so much. So this person asks, a recent claim was for an employee that terminated in December 2018, long after the 6 quarters you earlier referenced. I was recently contacted for more info on this employee's term. Isn't that outside of their eligibility window?
Yeah, so this one's going to depend because there could be a lot of reasons here. So first and foremost, the recent claim, if it was a claim that was filed way back in March of 2020, the final quarter of 2018 was actually part of the base period on that claim. And so if there's backlog there, that would explain something. If it's a very recent claim that was just filed, it could be an individual who had a workers' compensation issue where they were out for a period of time and now are released and able to go to work. So if somebody had workers' compensation, they qualify for a backdated base period. There could be other scenarios where maybe somebody initially was trying to file a claim using wages from another state, and that didn't come through, and they have deleted it and now have asked and received a backdated claim in Colorado where they had wages. So it is possible. It depends on what the actual effective date is of the claim. And just because a claim is being filed today doesn't guarantee that the effective date is actually this week. There are a couple other factors that can come into play. The vast majority, 99% of claims that will be filed today, which is Wednesday, will be effective this week, but there will be some that are backdated for various reasons.
Great, so I think we have about time for one more question here, and then I'd like to let our panelists go to be respectful of everyone's time. This person says, if we have not received info to deny certain claims, but then we receive letters that we would be responsible, how do we then appeal?
So if you're receiving a letter that you would be responsible, that should be a notice of decision telling you that the individual is entitled to benefits. So you can appeal it by completing the backside of that form, or you can go online and submit your appeal electronically on those decisions. So again, any decision that's telling you somebody is entitled to benefits based on your account contains appeal rights within the decision. If it doesn't contain appeal rights, then it's either telling you something else or asking you for some additional information on the individual, or some parties can become confused. The initial questionnaire or in the old days used to tell parties, here's what the potential charge is against your account. So again, that doesn't necessarily mean that at that point in time it's been determined that there'll be a charge against your account. You may receive, again, I think we talked earlier about this, charging statements all of a sudden showing charges for parties on there. Again, that's as we have continued to adjust and try to catch up on backlog, some of those charges will go away and they will be credits on future ones. If you separated somebody as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic, ultimately your account is supposed to be granted non-charging status related to that separation, which won't impact your experience rating related to that individual. If you discharge somebody or someone quit from you, and we determine it's for a qualifying reason, and you're not the last employer, but you're in that base period, and the whole reason that unemployment insurance claim was filed is because of the COVID-19 pandemic, then ultimately, even though we award benefits there, you also would be granted non-charging to your account because that unemployment insurance claim was filed as a direct result of COVID-19.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Phil. And that actually brings us right up to the hour here. I want to express our sincere thanks to the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, your team. You got through a lot of complex material this afternoon. We're really appreciative of your time. And Kristen White with Fisher & Phillips, thank you so much for joining us as well to offer the employment law perspective on these issues as well. To our attendees, we will have a recording of this that we're going to send out in our newsletter, as well as any hard copies of information received from our panelists today. But I do want to once again restate our sincere thanks to you guys for lending some time this afternoon to speak with us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.